A young man in designer clothes walked up to Sergeant Major David Cole, standing at his ceremonial post, and began laughing at the Victoria Cross pinned to his chest. "Nice cosplay, Granddad," he sneered, assuming his Victoria Cross was costume jewelry. The crowd started gathering as his taunts grew louder and more disrespectful. But what this cocky stranger didn't know was that he was mocking a man who wore the Victoria Cross, the country's highest award for valor, earned by carrying wounded soldiers through enemy fire in Afghanistan. The guard's response would leave him speechless and transform everyone watching. Before we reveal what happened next, make sure to like and subscribe for more incredible true stories. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Sergeant Major David Cole stood at his post outside the ceremonial gates with the kind of stillness that comes from years of military discipline. The morning sun caught the bronze surface of the Victoria Cross pinned to his chest, creating a small gleam that most tourists walking by never noticed. At 42, Cole had earned the right to wear Britain's highest military honor, but few people passing through the gates understood what the small cross-shaped medal truly represented. His red ceremonial uniform was pressed to perfection, every crease sharp enough to cut paper, yet beneath the fabric lay scars that told stories most civilians would never comprehend. The contrast between Cole's peaceful exterior and the battles raging in his memory created an invisible tension that seemed to hang in the air around him. While tourists snapped photos and chatted about their vacation plans, Cole carried the weight of experiences that had shaped him into someone who valued silence over recognition. The ceremonial gates he guarded represented tradition and honor, but they also served as a barrier between two worlds: the civilian life he struggled to understand and the military service that had defined him for decades. Every morning before taking his post, Cole followed the same ritual in his small apartment near the barracks. He would carefully remove the Victoria Cross from its case and polish the bronze surface with a soft cloth, not out of vanity, but as an act of remembrance. Each gentle stroke of the cloth was for the wounded soldiers he had carried through enemy fire and the brothers who never came home from Helmand province. The medal belonged as much to them as it did to him, and wearing it meant carrying their memory into each new day. Standing guard had become Cole's way of continuing to serve his country, even as civilian life felt increasingly foreign after 24 years in uniform. The structured world of the military made sense to him with clear objectives and brothers who would die for each other without question. The crowds that gathered around the ceremonial gates created a strange kind of isolation for Cole. Surrounded by hundreds of people each day, he felt more alone than he ever had in the mountains of Afghanistan. Most visitors treated the guards like decorative elements of British tradition, unaware that many of these men were seasoned combat veterans who had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other conflict zones around the world. They would pose next to Cole as if he were a statue, occasionally making jokes about his stillness or trying to get him to react for their social media posts. Many tourists questioned whether the medals were real, assuming that ceremonial guards were just actors hired to create atmosphere. This assumption particularly stung Cole because it reduced his service and the service of his fallen comrades to mere theater. Cole's patience had been tested many times over the years by tourists who pushed boundaries trying to get reactions or making inappropriate comments about his uniform and medals. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to remain motionless and silent even when people said things that would have started fights in civilian settings. But that patience wasn't infinite, and Cole knew that somewhere deep inside him lived a breaking point that few people had ever been foolish enough to approach. The morning routine of standing guard had become a meditation for Cole, a way to honor his service while processing the trauma that civilian therapists struggled to understand. Each hour of stillness was both penance and prayer, a way of maintaining the discipline that had kept him alive in combat zones. The tourists who passed by had no idea they were in the presence of someone who had made split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for entire platoons. As the morning sun climbed higher and the tourist crowds began to thicken, Cole sensed that this day would be different from the others. There was something in the air, a tension that his combat-trained instincts picked up on even before his conscious mind could identify the source. Years of warfare had taught him to trust those instincts, to recognize when a situation was about to shift from routine to dangerous. Standing at his post with the Victoria Cross catching the light, Cole noticed a shift in the crowd's energy as someone approached with the kind of confident stride that usually meant trouble. The young man who approached Cole that morning wore expensive clothes that announced his wealth before he even opened his mouth. His confident stride suggested someone who had never been told no in any meaningful way, and his perfectly styled appearance marked him as someone who treated the world like his personal stage. He walked up to Cole with a smirk that broadcast trouble to anyone paying attention, his eyes fixing immediately on the Victoria Cross pinned to Cole's chest. Something about the bronze medal triggered his assumption that it had to be fake. In his world of social media stunts, military medals were props you could order online to complete a costume. The idea that he might be looking at Britain's highest military honor never crossed his mind, because real heroes existed only in movies, not standing guard outside ceremonial gates. "Nice cosplay, Granddad," he said loudly enough for nearby tourists to hear his voice carrying across the courtyard with casual cruelty. His comment was designed to get attention, and it worked perfectly as heads began turning in their direction. The fact that he was mocking a stranger's military service didn't register as anything more serious than harmless entertainment to him. The tourists who had been taking photos of the gates suddenly found themselves witnessing something far more interesting than ceremonial traditions. A loose circle began forming around the young man and Cole as people sensed drama unfolding before their eyes. Some visitors looked uncomfortable with the obvious disrespect they were witnessing, but others moved closer with morbid curiosity. The mixture of smartphones rising and nervous glances created an atmosphere where everyone knew something significant was happening, but nobody understood exactly what they were about to witness. The young man fed off the growing attention like fuel on a fire. He needed constant validation to feel important, and getting reactions from authority figures made him feel powerful. Standing there in his expensive clothes surrounded by an audience, he felt like he was performing a comedy routine rather than attacking a decorated war veteran. The guard's military bearing and formal uniform only made him seem more like a character in his personal show. Cole's continued silence struck the young man as confirmation that his assumptions were correct. In his experience, people who stayed quiet when challenged were usually hiding something or too weak to fight back. The guard's refusal to respond or even acknowledge the insults convinced him that he was dealing with someone who knew the medal was fake and felt ashamed about being caught. This interpretation gave him confidence to escalate his attack because he believed he had already won the confrontation before it really began. The crowd's reactions remained mixed as the performance continued. Some tourists shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that mocking someone's military service crossed a line that decent people didn't cross. Others found themselves drawn into the spectacle, curious to see how far this would go and whether the guard would eventually break his silence. A few visitors whispered among themselves, trying to identify what kind of medal the guard was wearing. But most had no idea they were looking at the Victoria Cross or what that honor represented. The young man interpreted the crowd's attention as encouragement and decided to make his insults more specific and cutting. "Did you buy that thing online?" he asked, with a laugh that sounded more cruel than amused. His words were calculated to strip away whatever dignity the guard might have left and establish himself as the dominant figure in this public confrontation. The suggestion that Cole had purchased his Victoria Cross online revealed how completely the young man misunderstood what he was looking at. He viewed military honors as costume accessories rather than symbols of extraordinary sacrifice and courage. He had no concept that the medal he was mocking represented actions that most people couldn't imagine performing and sacrifices that most people couldn't comprehend making. Cole's silence stretched on, creating a tension that even the young man began to notice. The guard's stillness was no longer the peaceful discipline of ceremonial duty, but something much more intense and focused. The young man had unknowingly stepped into a confrontation. He was completely unprepared for challenging someone whose experiences had forged him in ways that his privileged background couldn't begin to understand. What he didn't realize was that his casual cruelty had awakened something in Cole that had been sleeping behind years of disciplined silence. The assumptions about fake medals and online purchases had crossed a line that connected directly. To Cole's deepest pain, the knowledge that men better than him had died earning honors they would never live to wear. He thought he was humiliating a costumed actor, but he had actually challenged a decorated war hero whose response would soon transform everyone watching into something far more than casual observers. The crowd that had started as casual observers began experiencing something much deeper than tourist curiosity as the young man continued his assault on Cole's dignity. What began as scattered interest from passing visitors transformed into focused attention from people who sensed they were witnessing something significant unfold before their eyes. Tourists paused mid-conversation and stopped taking photos as they realized this wasn't just another attempt to get a reaction from a guard, but something that carried real weight and consequence. Smartphones began emerging from pockets and purses as people sensed this confrontation might become something worth documenting. While a few onlookers who recognized the Victoria Cross immediately understood the gravity of the young man's disrespect. Among the growing circle of witnesses stood people with vastly different levels of understanding about what they were seeing. An elderly British man near the front of the crowd recognized the medal immediately, his face darkening as he watched the mockery of what he knew to be Britain's highest military honor. His wife tugged at his sleeve, sensing his anger but not understanding its source, while nearby a group of American tourists whispered among themselves, trying to figure out what kind of medal could cause such a heated exchange. The mixture of knowledge and ignorance within the crowd created layers of tension as some people understood the seriousness of the situation, while others remained oblivious to the storm brewing before them. The psychological dynamics of the gathering crowd revealed the complex nature of human behavior when witnessing conflict. Some visitors wanted desperately to intervene, to tell the young man to stop his disrespectful behavior and leave the guard alone. A middle-aged woman stepped forward twice as if to speak up, but each time she hesitated, frozen by the social awkwardness of confronting a stranger in public. Others felt the same urge to act, but found themselves paralyzed by uncertainty about how to handle the situation without making things worse. The diffusion of responsibility that comes with crowd situations meant that everyone assumed someone else would eventually step in to stop the harassment. Cole's continued silence created an atmosphere of almost unbearable tension that affected everyone watching. The tourists had expected some kind of reaction by now, either anger or at least acknowledgement of the insults being hurled at him. Instead, his perfect stillness suggested either incredible self-control or the calm before a devastating storm. The uncertainty about what would happen next drew the crowd deeper into the unfolding drama as people found themselves emotionally invested in an outcome they couldn't predict. Some witnesses began shifting their weight from foot to foot, unconsciously mirroring the nervous energy that Cole's silence generated in everyone around him. Close observers began noticing subtle signs that Cole's composure was being tested in ways that few people had ever attempted. The slight tightening of his jaw became visible to those standing near enough to see his face clearly. His breathing remained controlled but seemed to require more conscious effort than before, as if he was working harder to maintain his discipline. These micro-expressions told a story of internal struggle that made the tension even more palpable for those sharp enough to read the signs. The crowd had unknowingly transformed from casual tourists into an audience for a moment that would teach them profound lessons about respect, sacrifice, and the dangerous cost of making assumptions about others. They came expecting to see ceremonial guards and take photographs for their social media accounts, but instead found themselves witnessing a confrontation between ignorance and honor that would challenge everything they thought they knew about heroes and service. The circle of faces surrounding the young man and Cole represented every level of society, from wealthy tourists to working-class locals, all about to receive an education in what real courage looks like. The young man's performance was reaching its peak when Cole's internal struggle finally approached the breaking point that his military training had taught him to recognize and control. The moment hung in the air like electricity before a thunderstorm, as everyone present sensed that the guard's silence was about to end. Something fundamental was shifting in Cole's demeanor, a quiet decision forming behind his disciplined exterior that would transform the entire atmosphere around the ceremonial gates. Cole's voice cut through the young man's mockery with quiet authority that made every person within earshot stop whatever they were doing and listen. The sound wasn't loud or aggressive, but carried the kind of weight that comes from someone who has seen things most people only experience in nightmares. The young man's confident smirk began wavering as he realized the guard wasn't going to remain silent anymore, and that whatever came next would be different from anything he had prepared for. Helmand, 2009. The two words hit the crowd like a physical force, transforming the young man's uncertainty into something approaching fear. Sergeant Major Cole's simple declaration immediately established the setting and time of his combat experience, shifting the narrative from casual mockery to a moment of profound gravity. The year 2009 represented one of the most intense periods of fighting in Afghanistan's Helmand province, where British forces faced daily battles against a determined enemy. Cole continued speaking in the same measured tone that made his words even more powerful than any shouting could have been. He described an RPG ambush that destroyed his lead vehicle, how he carried 2 wounded men to cover, and even took a bullet through the leg before holding the line until air support arrived. His matter-of-fact delivery made the events even more chilling as he explained how the attack came without warning, turning a routine patrol into a fight for survival in the span of seconds. The fact that he described these extraordinary actions in such understated terms made them even more powerful, showing a man who viewed extraordinary sacrifice as ordinary responsibility. The young man stood frozen as Cole continued his account, describing actions that represented extraordinary courage under the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. The guard's tone never changed from that same calm delivery as he explained dragging his wounded comrades while enemy bullets flew around them. He spoke about protecting his fallen brothers, not as heroic acts worthy of recognition, but as basic responsibilities that any soldier would fulfill for his comrades in arms. The emotional intensity in the crowd grew as people realized they were hearing a first-hand account of extraordinary courage under fire. Cole's description of continuing to fight while wounded demonstrated the kind of dedication to duty that most people could barely imagine. His calm recounting of taking enemy fire while protecting his comrades showed the crowd what real courage looked like when stripped of Hollywood glamour. Cole's words stripped away every assumption the young man had made about the Victoria Cross and its authenticity. The designer clothes and confident attitude suddenly seemed pathetic in comparison to the real experiences being described before him. His casual references to buying medals online revealed how completely he had misunderstood what he was mocking. The crowd watched as the young man's worldview collapsed under the weight of Cole's quiet testimony about service and sacrifice that went far beyond anything his privileged background could comprehend. The matter-of-fact way Sergeant Major Cole delivered his account made his actions even more impressive to everyone listening. He didn't dramatize or embellish the events, but simply stated what had happened as if carrying wounded soldiers through enemy fire was just another day at the office. This understated approach revealed someone who had been forged by experiences that transformed ordinary men into extraordinary ones. As Cole continued his story, the crowd began understanding that they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple confrontation between a tourist and a guard. They were receiving an education in what military service actually meant and what the medals on Cole's chest represented. The Victoria Cross wasn't costume jewelry or a prop for social media posts, but a symbol of actions that most people would never be brave enough to attempt. The transformation in the young man was visible to everyone watching as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. His mockery had backfired in the most spectacular way possible, revealing him as someone who attacked what he didn't understand and disrespected what he couldn't comprehend. Cole's quiet dignity in sharing his experiences created a stark contrast with the young man's earlier behavior, showing the difference between someone who had earned respect through service and someone who demanded attention through cruelty. Cole's account established that his experiences in Helmand had created obligations that extended far beyond his military service. His willingness to break his silence and share these painful memories showed that some insults cross lines that even the most disciplined soldier cannot ignore. The bronze medal on his chest was about to reveal depths of meaning that would transform everyone's understanding of what they were truly witnessing. Cole's voice took on a deeper resonance as he began explaining what the Victoria Cross truly represented, his words carrying the weight of history and personal loss that transformed the bronze medal from simple metal into something sacred. The crowd sensed they were about to learn something profound as Cole's tone shifted from recounting combat actions to revealing the deeper meaning behind the honor pinned to his chest. His explanation would strip away every casual assumption about military medals and replace them with an understanding of sacrifice that most civilians never encounter in their daily lives. The Queen herself pinned the Victoria Cross to my chest, Cole said, his voice steady despite the emotion underlying each word. The revelation hit the crowd like a physical force as people realized they were looking at someone who had stood before the monarch of Britain and received the nation's highest recognition for valor. The ceremony Cole described was a rare honor that few soldiers ever experience, an event so exclusive that most career soldiers never witness it, let alone participate in it personally. The image of the Queen personally recognizing Cole's actions elevated the entire confrontation from street harassment to something approaching the sacred. The emotional intensity building in the crowd became palpable as Cole continued explaining the true significance of his medal. The Victoria Cross wasn't just recognition for his actions during the ambush, but represented a standard of courage so exceptional that only a handful of soldiers in each generation ever reach it. The bronze medal connected Cole to a tradition of British military valor, stretching back over 150 years, carrying within it the spirit of every recipient who had earned the honor through extraordinary acts of courage under fire. Cole's next words delivered the emotional blow that would transform everyone watching from casual observers into witnesses to something profound. "I don't wear this medal for personal recognition," he said, his voice carrying a pain that made several people in the crowd step closer. "I wear it as a living memorial to those who never came home." The simple statement revealed the true burden of survival and the complex emotions that came with being honored while brothers in arms lay buried in foreign soil. His explanation showed that the Victoria Cross wasn't a prize to be celebrated, but a responsibility to be carried for the rest of his life. He named comrades who died in the same ambush, underscoring that the Victoria Cross honors their sacrifice as much as his own. Each name Cole spoke hit the young man like a physical blow as he began understanding the magnitude of his mistake. The soldiers Cole described weren't characters in a movie or statistics in a news report, but real people with families and dreams who had died protecting their comrades and their country. The young man's designer clothes and confident attitude suddenly seemed pathetic compared to the sacrifice being described before him. His casual mockery of the Victoria Cross had transformed into an attack on the memory of dead soldiers whose names would never be forgotten by the man who survived to tell their story. The crowd's understanding shifted completely as Cole's revelation transformed what had seemed like a simple confrontation between a tourist and a guard into a lesson about sacrifice and memory that would stay with them forever. People who had initially watched for entertainment now found themselves fighting back tears as they realized they were witnessing someone carrying the weight of survivors' guilt and the responsibility of honoring fallen comrades. The Victoria Cross had revealed its true power not as decoration or symbol of personal achievement, but as a bridge connecting the living with the dead. The young man's growing horror became visible to everyone watching as he realized his mockery had targeted not just Cole, but the memory of every soldier who died in that Afghan ambush. his face drained of color as the full implications of his behavior sank in, showing him as someone who had attacked what he couldn't understand and disrespected what he couldn't comprehend. The expensive clothes that had made him feel superior now seemed like costume jewelry compared to the authentic honor worn by the man standing before him. Cole's dignity remained intact throughout his explanation, but observers could see the vulnerability beneath his strength as he spoke about carrying the burden of survival. The pain in his eyes revealed someone who questioned every day why he had lived while better men died and who wore his medal not as celebration, but as penance. His willingness to share these deeply personal experiences with strangers showed the depth of his commitment to honoring his fallen comrades, even when it meant exposing his own emotional wounds to public scrutiny. The Victoria Cross had revealed its true nature through Cole's words, transforming from a piece of bronze into a living connection between past sacrifice and present responsibility. The medal served as physical proof that freedom comes at a cost paid by people most civilians will never meet or understand. Cole's explanation showed that military honors aren't awarded for glory, but earned through actions that most people pray they never have to perform. The weight of his words hung in the air as everyone present began to grasp the profound responsibility he carried every day. Silence fell as everyone realized they'd witnessed a lesson in honor they'd never forget. Marcus stood frozen in place, his mouth slightly open but no words emerging as his brain struggled to process the complete destruction of everything he had assumed about the man standing before him. His designer clothes now felt like a costume worn by someone playing a character he no longer wanted to be. The crowd's behavior underwent a transformation that was visible to anyone watching, their casual observation shifting to reverent attention as people understood they were witnessing history rather than entertainment. Phones that had been raised to capture what they thought would be another viral video were slowly lowered as people recognized this moment demanded respect rather than documentation. The teenage girl who had been recording put her phone away completely while her mother wiped tears from her eyes. The businessman who had paused his commute found himself standing straighter as if Cole's military bearing was somehow contagious. Cole made his decision to walk away without seeking any acknowledgement or apology from Marcus, showing the kind of quiet dignity that defines true heroes. He didn't wait for thanks or expect Marcus to grovel for forgiveness, because his purpose in sharing his story wasn't about personal vindication, but about honoring the memory of fallen comrades. His movements remained controlled and purposeful as he prepared to leave the scene that had become an unexpected classroom in respect and sacrifice. The choice to walk away demonstrated that real strength doesn't require validation from others, especially from someone who had proven incapable of understanding what service truly means. As Cole began to move away from his post, an elderly spectator whispered, "That's Sergeant Major David Cole. He's the real deal." The confirmation hit the crowd like a final piece of evidence that transformed any remaining doubts into absolute certainty about Cole's authenticity and reputation. The elderly man's words served as a bridge connecting Cole's personal story to his broader legacy of service that extended far beyond this single confrontation. The crowd began parting as Cole walked through their midst, creating a natural pathway that demonstrated the reverence his story had inspired. People stepped aside not out of fear, but out of deep respect for someone whose experiences had earned him a place of honor in their hearts. Children were gently pulled closer to their parents so they could witness this moment of dignity in action. The American tourists who had been whispering earlier now stood in respectful silence, understanding that they were seeing something uniquely British, yet universally human in its power to inspire. Cole's departure created a powerful visual image that would stay with everyone who witnessed it. He carried himself with the same military bearing that had defined his posture throughout the confrontation, but now his dignity seemed to glow with the light of shared truth. The Victoria Cross on his chest caught the morning sun as he walked, creating small flashes of light that seemed to honor the memory of every soldier whose sacrifice the medal represented. His measured steps showed no urgency to escape the situation, but rather the calm confidence of someone who had fulfilled his duty by speaking truth to ignorance. The transformation in the crowd's understanding created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate witnesses. People began speaking quietly among themselves about what they had just experienced, sharing their newfound appreciation for military service and the sacrifices made by people they pass on the street every day without recognition. A young mother explained to her children why the man's story was important, while a college student called his grandfather who had served in Vietnam to tell him about what he had witnessed. Cole's return to his ordinary world came with the knowledge that he had transformed not just Marcus, but every person who witnessed their confrontation. His willingness to break his silence and share his most painful memories had created a moment of education that would ripple outward through social media posts, conversations, and changed perspectives about military service. The courage he had shown in Afghanistan continued to inspire courage in civilian life, demonstrating that heroism isn't confined to battlefields but can emerge anywhere someone chooses dignity over silence when faced with ignorance and disrespect. The morning sun continued to shine on the ceremonial gates, but the atmosphere had been permanently altered by Cole's story. As the crowd slowly dispersed, carrying with them a new understanding of what respect truly means, they carried something deeper than entertainment or social media content. They carried a glimpse into the extraordinary stories that walk among us every day, hidden behind ordinary appearances and quiet dignity. The confrontation outside those ceremonial gates revealed a truth that extends far beyond military service. True heroism lives not in seeking applause or recognition, but in carrying the weight of duty with quiet dignity while honoring those who paid the ultimate price. Cole's willingness to break his silence came not from wounded pride, but from responsibility to fallen comrades whose stories deserved respect rather than mockery. Next time you see someone in uniform, remember the stories they might carry. The veteran at the grocery store might have saved lives under enemy fire. The quiet neighbor could have sacrificed years serving others in distant conflicts. Respect means recognizing the unseen battles fought for our freedom and the prices paid by those who chose service over comfort. If this story changed how you see heroism, let us know in the comments.